all of this means for the healthiness of our bay, for the healthiness of our waterways as a whole, and also for our Earth as we battle climate change.
And finally, the month of June is all about the rainbow flag, as it is a time when we celebrate Pride Month. Here in Montgomery County, leaders kicked off the recognition by raising the pride flag here in Rockville for the very first time. For the first time in Montgomery County history, a pride flag now waves at Veterans Plaza. Leaders, activists, and residents all came together for today's event, which was led by Evan Glass, the county's first openly gay council member.
50 years ago, there were few establishments that welcomed and served the LGBTQ community. And it was up until the 1970s that the American Psychiatric Association listed homosexuality as a mental disorder.
The flag raising kicks off events for the month of June and comes as the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots, which became a catalyst for the gay movement, is recognized. Councilmember Glass told the group assembled at the event that when he was 22 years old, he made a New Year's resolution to be true to himself at all times.
And it's my hope that as an openly gay elected official, I can help create an environment where parents, friends, family members, teachers, and others feel safe being true to themselves and accepting others for who they are.
While there has been legislative progress made with LGBTQ rights here in Montgomery County,
and Montgomery County affirms our commitment to full equality for all LGBTQ plus residents.
Problems still exist. Since 2015, 49 hate crimes have been reported here, and the frequency of those events is increasing.
And so today it's an important day because it reminds us of our commitment, but we have a long way to go. And there are many of you in the audience that have a lot of very important suggestions that we need to take up at the state level or locally to make sure we pass legislation, to make sure that we fund certain programs, to make sure that we are actually doing what we need to do.
Both the rainbow flag and the transgender flag were represented at today's event. Councilmember Glass says having open conversations and learning from each other is how we can create a truly inclusive community and positively change.
While we're here in Montgomery County, we've made great strides in equality and representing our LGBTQ residents. It is our transgender community, particularly transgender youth, Black transgender women, and LGBTQ non-white individuals who are more likely to experience violence than any of their LGBTQ peers.
Councilmember Glass is sponsoring a series of Pride events for the month of June that are open to all.
It's my hope that as we make history here today in Montgomery County by flying the Pride flag on our official flag post, we will signal to all LGBTQ residents that we embrace you and we love you.
Well, that does it for this edition of The Bottom Line. For County Cable Montgomery, I'm Susan Kennedy. Thanks for watching.
Up next, the Montgomery County
afternoon. This is a GO and T&E work session on declaration of no further need, disposition of County Public Parking Lot 43, located at 8009 Woodmont Avenue, Bethesda, Maryland. And we do have Mr. Roshdi here. Hi, how are you? Are you Mr. Dumont? Great. And Ms. McMillan has prepared a packet for us that describes the terms of this disposition. So unless Councilmember Hucker, Chair of T&E, has any opening remarks, I'll turn it over to Ms.
I have none.
McMillan. Excellent. So we'll turn it over to you.
I'd like a copy of them.
So just as a little bit of background to remind folks who might be watching, there is a property disposition law, and it requires under certain circumstances for the council to approve a declaration of no further need, which is sent by the executive and sets forth the material terms of the disposition. As a part of that, the council also has the authority to waive a fair market value transaction. That is in the property disposition law part. This particular project crosses over into the parking lot district law as well, and that's where the issue that really is the issue before you today on this disposition comes up, which is why this is a little more complicated than some of the other ones that we've had. But generally speaking, in your packet, you have the material terms for the disposition of parking lot 43 in the Bethesda parking lot district. This is a 12,500 square foot parking lot. It is one property, but it is the only county property, which is here for disposition, that is part of a project of assembled properties that's known as 8,000 Wisconsin Avenue now. And so the Department of Transportation did issue a request for development proposals for this parking lot. That came forward. They went through that process. And at the time of that process, did an appraisal on the property because the parking lot district law requires that the parking lot districts receive a fair market value for property when it's sold. There are some conditions under which property can be leased at below market value for affordable housing, but they do not apply in this particular situation. And this is a fee simple sale that'll be part of a larger development. And so generally speaking, what you see is that you have this will be part of a mixed use project. The property would be sold to Ascolu Properties in a fee simple transaction. Again, it was sent to you as a full market value transaction at $7.5 million. This developer did respond to the request for the development proposals. No department or agency expressed an interest in the reuse of the property. They will develop a mixed-use project, and this is under the initial terms, so some things will change slightly. This says with at least 310 residential units, and that 20% of the units would be moderately priced dwelling units affordable to households whose incomes do not exceed 65% of area median income. The development would have approximately 13,638 square feet of commercial and retail, and there would be at least 354 parking spaces or such number as required for housing and retail uses. And there was also discussion in the RFP about making sure that there was not a reliance on other PLD facilities to account for that parking, because the goal is not to put burden on other PLD facilities. So the project has moved forward, and the scope of the project is a little different, which is reasonable. There are more total units, thus there will actually be more MPDUs in total as well. This developer is actually going to provide 25% MPDUs, which is a greater percentage than the 20% that was a part of the RFP. The RFP was put out asking for at least 20% because they wanted to be certain to be above the 12.5 or 15% that would have been sort of the normal development, but this developer is moving forward with 25%. And so I would just say that the parking also now is shown as being at about 312 vehicles. And the applicant, and I note this because this is one of the things that has changed over time, the applicant is getting, has requested benefit points because they're providing fewer than the maximum number of parking spaces, which is now one of our policies, in certain areas of the county, is to reduce parking. So there are a couple places where we have some inconsistencies. The first one is actually on the size of the parcel. The executive order that came over incorrectly stated the size of the parcel as 7,700 square feet. That actually is just an error, but I do think that that has to be corrected because that speaks to the size of the parcel. The second has to do with the parking spaces as described, and I think I will actually just let Mr. Roshdi comment on the change in the parking spaces and how they're viewing their compliance.
Good afternoon. Let me start by saying in terms of our approach for developing this property was a number of things. First of all, we got our appraisal for this property at the time we advertised it, not only for fair market value, but for highest and best use of the property. And in our agreement, initial agreement, the developer agreed to pay full appraised value. The second item, which we made a requirement, and was the additional MPDUs. We required the developer provide 20% MPDU in lieu of 15%, which was the code requirement. And then finally, parking itself. We required that the developer satisfy its parking need, so there will not be a reliance on the PLD for providing parking, either for the retail or for the residential units. And the timing of course, we were proceeding forward, announced it, as the packet indicates, in 2015. However, right after that, we learned about the Bethesda master plan. So at that point, I felt that we should pause because initially, during the master planning process, they were giving higher densities to some of the properties. And this was one of the properties that I went to the planning board twice and testify and ask for 5 FAR. At the same time, my intention was that if it is changed, then we will change the price. That's why we didn't come to the council with the disposition process. And of course, the initial approach changed, and then the density did not change at that point. The parking, we just basically wanted to satisfy their parking needs. It's fairly it is dynamic. It's not a fixed number. Even when we are building a garage, we say we want to build a garage for 1,000 space, but it may end up to be 20, 30, 40, up or down because of the other stuff that goes into the space. So our intent was to require the developer to satisfy their parking needs. It was not really 350 or 312. So in this case, my understanding is that 312, they're completely meeting their requirements for the parking. And so therefore, and also I think in safeguarding the county, we actually put in an escalator in the price because we do not settle the property until they're ready to go into construction, because the whole intent of the sale is to make the development happen. And so therefore, we put in a 3% escalator on an annual basis. And now, of course, when we send it over, we learn that, well, we have to have an updated appraisal. And the change and the numbers has changed. However, I can say that even at the current price, it is a fair market. It is a fair deal because they're providing additional MPDUs. They're providing the parking where they don't need to even provide a single parking space if they are building in Bethesda because they are within the district. So I do support the Linda's recommendation. So if you have a question for me.
Well, I guess my overall question has to do, I mean, I understand that, of course, we did go through a process with the master plan, et cetera. Just, most recently, we've had so many conversations about the dire issue regarding our provision of affordable housing units. And I know the executive has expressed interest in looking at every, even single county-owned garage, et cetera, to be able to produce more units. And so even though we are going to, get 25%, because this is about, of course, disposition, meaning that the county does not believe that it needs this particular site, but it doesn't seem to align very well with a lot of the conversation out there about the need for the county to secure and preserve as many opportunities with county-owned properties to provide affordable housing. So I'm just curious about that conversation, with regards to this particular county-owned.
Yeah, actually, in regards to affordable housing, by the way, just to go back a little bit before even 2014, this property was advertised even 4 or 5 or 6 years before that. And that developer did not. Actually, JBG was the selected developer before, and they were not able to achieve their goal. So it was the second time that we advertised. And although it's not all affordable housing, keep in mind that we made a good agreement based on what we felt that was needed at the time. We asked for additional affordable housing, and keep in mind 25% of the proceed will go to the housing fund, and so therefore it has that benefit as well. So I think in terms of affordable housing at 25% in lieu of 15%, that's a win. In terms of parking, again, that's another advantage that we have here, which we don't need to provide or even be concerned with the lack of parking for this side of the vista.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Again, I just wanted to make sure that we are cognizant of the fact that whenever there are these lofty goals regarding workforce housing or affordable housing, and we say that we're trying to maximize public-owned sites or land, that sometimes you run into these issues of how do you make the financing work? How do you, try to figure out what is the best possible output? And in this case, the executive has, concluded that the best way forward is to declare this as a site of no further need, et cetera, and proceed in this fashion. Councilmember Friedson, who represents that district.
Thank you. And I'm a neighbor of the property. I think it's important for us to know what we're talking about here, just to piggyback off of the council president's points. We're talking about a surface parking lot that is serving a very limited need and the opportunity to utilize it to serve a tremendous need in housing broadly and larger than normal affordable housing. And so there's a lot to be excited about, I think, in terms of utilizing a property in order to help us get towards our goal. Again, we can't solve all of this challenge in one disposition or in one situation, but this helps us to take another notch out of it, and I think it will help us get to where we wanted to go. A couple questions that I had specifically on this. The appraisal, was that appraisal done at the 25% MPDU that we are at for this project, and the provision of 65% versus 70% of MPDU, which I understand is
I don't think so. We actually get the appraisal for, as I mentioned, for highest and best use and fair market value as a...
The updated appraisal as well?
Yes.
So it's not really an apples to apples comparison, because we're getting 10% more, 33 more affordable units at a more affordable rate, 65 versus 70 of median income. Is that fair?
That is correct. Actually, that's why I said that there is two parts to this. The parking that we are requiring them to provide, which is not required in Bethesda PLD, and also the additional PMPDUs. And the appraised value is purely based on highest and best use of assembled properties.
Both the original assessment and the current one. Linda, did you want to say something?
Well, I wanted to just say that the reason that this is highlighted is the property disposition law is very specific. That's something that you classify as a full market value has to be based on an appraisal done within the last 12 months, and that was why we asked for the additional appraisal from the executive branch. And so under the structure of the law, that is what the definition of full market value is. So I think you're raising points about whether you could have discussion about that, but under the code, we have to, the council is asked to make a decision of whether they're approving a full market value or not based on an appraisal done within the last 12 months.
No, and I appreciate that. And I think I applaud you and council staff for noticing the issue and making sure that we're consistent with what the law states. I just think it's important for us to be discussing what we're talking about here. I think it's also important, as you mentioned, the delay here, which has changed, has changed the highest and best use of the property. And what we're, the decision point that we have here is on the county. It's not on the developer. We decided to hold off. I'm not questioning that decision, but it was your decision to hold off on that to make sure, which I don't think was necessarily a wrong decision, but it was based off of us. If they had delayed, we had the 3% escalator clause. We had a provision to determine the delay, but if we delay, there's
3% applies anyway, regardless. They have agreed, and we are adjusting the price based on that 3%.
So they still are going to pay the 3% premium
Yes.
off of our delay.
It's not our delay. It was a point that we could not go forward because there was a master planning taking place in parking planning, and there was a modification to the master plan. So even the developer couldn't move forward with the project at that point.
I think the larger point that I was trying to make is it wasn't based off of, we were hoping that they would build the housing, which we recognize as a critical need, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to dispose of the property. And they decided not to build it, and the price has gone up because they didn't decide to build it. It was not on them. My view on this, I don't think that we should be interfering with a project that solves a need. I think that the PLD should be funded. I think we should find a way to fund it over time, over extended period of time potentially, and I'd be open to any of those plans, but I wouldn't want to add significant amount of cost on a project that's going to help us resolve housing and affordable housing in an area where it's desperately needed, and to throw a wrench into what I think is a project that supports the public interest in a significant way.
Thank you. I don't think that was a recommendation. Yeah, I just have some observations. I think that was a recommendation, and I guess what I was just wanted to, clarify is that I am aware of what is there now and what is proposed. I was just pointing out that there's been just so much conversation about the need for workforce housing and the issue of affordable housing and maximizing every single county-owned site, et cetera, that is just interesting that in this particular case, we are going to be able to achieve some of that. But I think this particular example exemplifies, in my opinion, why this is not like a very clear-cut thing or panacea necessarily. That obviously we are going to have to be very careful in terms of our public land and our public facilities. But there are so many other issues that come into play that may not necessarily mean that this is how we're going to solve it all. So when the executive says that he wants to use every single public, land or site, et cetera, in this case, as we can see why, that's not, being done. And so I just want to make sure that we are, being mindful.
I just want to clarify, my comments were not in response to the comments that you were making. They're in the broader question of whether or not that the funding gap should be, we should require that and put a wrench into a deal that I think serves the public interest. And so I was more speaking to the broader issue than a direct response to yours, Madam President. Thanks.
Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. I'm glad that you made the comments that you made, Council President, because I think it's important for us to be mindful that public property is a very rare opportunity, and we have to have very, if we're not going to use public land for more housing, there needs to be a very compelling reason for that. And I agree, to the point that the county executive has often said that all the other housing initiatives that we talk about won't do enough for lowest income residents, people at 30% AMI. The only way to provide new housing for people at that income point is to have very, very subsidized construction. And so our ability to offer land at a price that can make that construction workable is one of the ways to achieve it, as are other incentives that we could provide. So, we have to be very intentional about that. And, but my question is, I'm glad to see this project is at 25% affordable. I think it's great. I'd like to, it could be better. I'd like to ask about that, but I do want to just, salute the provision that allows for developers to get taxes, impact taxes waived when they go to 25%. And I think that units in downtown Bethesda are particularly valuable because they're close to jobs and, they're in schools that don't have concentrated poverty, and there's just a lot of additional opportunity that comes with affordable housing that's provided in such an expensive job center as Bethesda. So I think that is really great. But so the initial RFI or RFP was for 20% and with a fair market value based on an appraisal. So theoretically, that land was the same cost as would have been paid on the market if someone was just selling it. So what enables the developer to come in at 20% in this case? There's got to be some give somewhere else. I'm just interested to know what your view is on that. And then secondly, when they decided to go to 25%, what's the cost? What are we giving up there in terms of revenue? And did you renegotiate anything based on that? Or did you say, okay, that's your prerogative. You can go to 25% because that's allowed by the law?
Let me answer the first question, and then I will let Linda handles the second one. The first one is why would any developer would come and pay the county full market value at highest and best use, and on top of that, the additional MPDUs or even parking that they could do without. It's really a donut hole. So that you might have assemblage of the properties. There is one very valuable piece in the middle that can make it work. That is the key.
I missed that. I heard you say it, but
That is the key. That's why, in this case, we didn't need parking because operating a small parking lot is not efficient. So that's why we didn't ask for any replacement parking for public, because we think their parking would be sufficient. And then there was another instance where we sold a property, a very small one, to Donahue, which they built their headquarters and 2 towers in that. And that was, again, the donut hole that was missing, and are willing to pay the premium, actually, to buy our property and do this kind of assemblage.
So we're getting more than fair market value, essentially.
Yes. In a sense, the Councilmember Friedman's question was fair, because if they bought this from a regular seller, they could do no parking and they could do only 15% MPDU. We require 20%. So from 20% to go to 25%, make it attractive to this developer to get that benefit of tax relief, and then provide the additional MPDUs. But our RFP required 20%.
And then when they went to 25%, did that change anything from your perspective?
Not from us, except that they are providing more affordable housing and they're getting some, I guess, incentive in terms of heights, or I'm not sure about that. So,
did you ever consider saying, well, wait a second, now you're getting a lot more, you're going to 25 from 20, which you've already factored as economic for you? Is not the same thing as going from 12.5 to 25?
So that's why they're providing that additional 5%. When they go that...
No, I know. I'm saying, but they were already at 20.
20.
And now they're going to 25. It's a bit different than going from 12.5 to 25.
From 15 to 25.
Or 15 to 25. Okay, I'll pause there for now.
Thank you. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much. I think we should be clear. First off, they signed a contract with the county way back when for a $7.5 million with a 3% escalator.
Yes.
And so we're following that contract. It's not like we're going out and asking for new bidders at this point. So I have no problem whatsoever not asking for a new appraisal. I mean, we want every person that is buying property in Montgomery County for it to go up. I mean, that's the idea of this. So I have no problem with that part. And we're clear that it's going to be 8 million and whatever the number is for the actual cost. And I guess candidly, when they were able to assemble the other properties, that's when they were able to get to the 25%. This property still might have 20% of affordable on this property. I mean, but it's in the greater one where they were able to do it. So it was good business practice for us. It was good business practice for them, and we're going to get to our 25% affordable units. I think this is a good deal, and I think, I certainly am going to vote in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hooker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had two questions about the parking, which have been answered. Forgive me if you've already said this out, but what's the mix of the anticipated housing? Studios, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom, 5 bedroom?
I do not know 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, but I know from the packet that
I didn't see it in the packet.
it's actually 20,000 square feet of retail use.
Right.
And 400
But I mean the residential.
family dwelling units, and 25% MPDU, which results in 211 MPDUs.
Right.
But I don't know the mix of 1 bedroom.
That's what I'm
bedroom.
asking.
Yes, I do not know that.
Page 3.
And do you know whether they have any retail tenants in mind?
I have no idea.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Glass.
Thank you. So I've done some back of the envelope math here, and based on the 441 units proposed in this project, with the baseline that 15% are already mandated, because we're talking about Bethesda, the RFP asked for 20 and they went up to 25. So the difference between the 15% that's mandated and the 25% they're offering is 44 units. Got to be honest that we've been talking a lot about the precious resource that is county property, and I'm not quite sure this does it, that the increase of 44 units, as important as affordable housing and MPDUs are, I don't think this is a good deal, and I don't think it's a good value to the taxpayers of Montgomery County to be giving up county property for 44 units. That's all I have to say.
Okay, Councilmember Friedson, do you have your light on still? Or? No. Okay. All right. So, Councilmember Reamer.
So the 25% applies to the whole assemblage,
Yes.
or just?
No, the whole assembly.
So that's the distinction. It's not just they're doing 25% on this property. It's multiple
This
properties.
property by itself could not be developed.
And that's the other thing. I think that's the answer to the concern is that this property, we couldn't put something else there.
You can put a house.
12,000 square feet.
Yeah. So
With the exception of assemblage. I mean,
unless you're part of this assemblage.
yes,
That's the only way to get housing here.
exactly.
Well, you would have a very small infill footprint building.
Yeah.
As opposed to something that's a larger assemblage. So it would be a very different type of infill development as opposed to a larger assemblage project.
But it is part of an assemblage.
It's zoned the same, so it's not,
Yeah. You could do something.
you could do
else
something. It would
other
just be-
than a single.
It would be a
home.
small building.
But the fact is that it is part of an assemblage.
Yes.
Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I'm a little bit confused here. I mean, I think we got to focus on what we're talking about. I think we started that way, and I think we've delved a little bit beyond that. I totally appreciate making sure that we're getting the best deal for our dollars and for our resources, and certainly county property is a finite resource, and we are not growing in the resources that we have at the way that we would like. But 44 units in Bethesda are hugely valuable assets, and the cost of what that would take in order to build 44 affordable units, and what that would cost in the HIF or in some other mechanism in order to build them. I find it, I think we're being a little bit dismissive of what the value of 44 additional units are. And as we've talked, I think there has been an unfortunate conversation of late talking about MPDUs. Now, MPDUs do not solve deeply affordable, they're only affordable, when in case that's not accurate. MPDUs, 30 to 40% of them of the stock that we have are used to provide below 60%. In this case, they're capped at 65, and this is what allows our nonprofits to purchase these, the organizations that provide to folks with disabilities like Jewish Foundation for Group Homes, et cetera. This is what allows folks to leverage federal housing vouchers that wouldn't be able to do it in Bethesda at all without subsidized MPDUs, and then we can further allow it to be deeply affordable. So we are getting 44 units in the most expensive real estate in Montgomery County. We are leveraging an extremely small parcel into a much larger assemblage to satisfy a huge priority area. I think, to me, the question at hand here is whether or not we think we ought to ask the person who signed a contract, to the point that, you know, Council Vice President Katz made, to come back to the table because this was delayed, largely on our end. No blame going around, but it wasn't their fault. It was a decision that was made, or whether we think that the deal that was signed for the deal that we have to solve this critical issue that we have, and the 3% escalator that we have in place, is appropriate. And I think it absolutely is. This is something that we should move forward with, and any disruption to this is holding the opportunity to have housing, and a significant amount of affordable housing that we otherwise wouldn't have, replacing an underutilized parking lot that is completely cost ineffective and doesn't serve a significant public purpose. And I just hope that we don't lose the forest for the trees and get caught up in the details and lose the big picture here. I'm all for details. I'm all for making sure we get the best deal. 44 units that we otherwise wouldn't have that are affordable, not to mention more than 300 units that we otherwise wouldn't have when we desperately need both in the most desirable area and the most expensive area in the county, is a good deal, and I think we should abide by the deal that we had in place, and we should move forward.
Let me make one correction, sir. The total number of MPDUs is 111, is not 44. 44 is the addition.
The delta.
The delta.
I was just speaking about, I think he was saying the difference between what we would have had if this was a private sector development and what we have on the delta is 44. I agree with you. 111 is a huge number of MPDUs.
More than twice of any other property. And I tell you what.
But even 44 at an average of $500,000,
Yeah, I'm going to do a
one-bedroom
time
unit.
check because the GO committee and the T&E committee have another
I
committee.
just want to say
I'm
that.
pretty good at counting votes. I don't think that what I'm hearing is that people are against this. The reason why we passed this disposition, property disposition law, was specifically so the council could have an opportunity to look at details and to make a decision that was in the best interest of taxpayers, precisely because we don't have a lot of public land and public sites available. And so this is what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to ask questions. It is a new administration. It is a new day. It's a new council. There have been some, statements made that have talked about the need to preserve and protect and, leverage as much as possible public sites. And so that's what this is all about. We're doing our work by asking all these very important questions to understand, whether we should go ahead and do this. Remember, in the past, this exercise didn't exist. So the council did not have an opportunity to take another look and make the determination that this was no longer needed for public use. But I think that I am pretty good in counting votes, and I don't think that I'm hearing, I know Councilmember Glass has strong views that somehow we want to not proceed, but I was going to say Councilmember McMillan.
No. Thank you.
So used to it. Can you quickly tell us what are those decision points so that we can wrap up?
And I agree with the last one, too. Councilmember Milone does a wonderful job. Yeah.
She does.
So given that I think the process was followed in good faith, it's just taken a long time to get here. I am recommending approval, but there are some conditions that I think that you should require before you have the full council consider it. The first is that we need to issue a corrected executive order to make it clear that it's a 12,500 square foot parcel.
Okay, let me pause there. So is there any objection to that? Okay, excellent.
And then if it's acceptable, which it sounds like it is, to have fewer than the 354 spaces, since we're correcting the executive order anyway, I think we should amend the language to be clear that there wasn't an expectation for 354 spaces.
Any objection? Nope.
My understanding, and I think we still should get written confirmation of this, is that DHCA would have an MPDU agreement based on these material terms. And my understanding now is that the 20%, which was the material terms, would be at 65% of AMI. The MPDUs would be affordable to people at 65% of AMI, and the additional 5% would fall under the standard MPDU program, which in a high-rise building is normally up to 70% of AMI.
All right. How are we with that? Any objection? Everybody's good. Yep.
Okay. I think that the council needs to approve this, saying that they are waiving the full market value requirement because of the property disposition law is very clear about what a full market value requirement is, but the council can waive that. And that you would have language in your approval resolution that says the council waives the requirement for a full market value disposition. The fiscal year 2021 to 2026 fiscal plan for the Bethesda parking lot district must include any transfers from the general fund needed to comply with any requirement that the parking lot district be reimbursed at fair market value. So in next year's budget, when you see the fiscal plan for the PLD, there should be an accounting for this. It can be over multiple years. In the discussions, it didn't have to be all in 1 year, but it should be accounted for whatever the requirement is of the time. And I think that when the council considers this, if you approve this with this language, the council president should send something specifically to the county executive and the OMB director noting this expectation. And then also I would just say that I think the GEO committee should have a discussion of some additional issues, including this one, when it has its discussion of Bill 1319, which is an amendment to the property disposition bill, which really was introduced based on the Inspector General recommendations. But since you will have that before you, council staff and council attorney staff will work to bring you a few other issues that in particular this is highlighted, and perhaps some other places to clarify the property disposition law. But with that, if those are met, I would recommend approval.
All right. Any objection to those other last 2 points? Okay.
And then I did just note for you, but it's also been said that the executive is intending to make the transfer to the Housing Initiative Fund, which then will also assist with affordable housing.
Excellent. That's wonderful. All right. So I think without objection, we will incorporate those conditions and make a recommendation for no further need. Is that okay? I'm looking.
Okay.
Okay. GEO joint. Is that okay?
We have another shot at this in full council, yeah, right? So, okay.
So am I
Yep.
Okay.
All right. So
unanimous on that for council, or?
that's what I'm trying to assess. Is it unanimous?
No.
Jointly?
Yeah.
Okay. So it would be, however, how many of us? 4, 5? 5 to 1. We're adjourned, the joint committee.
Okay.
GEO is going to go to the third floor.